The DC animated universe is famed for taking established comic book characters and reimagining them for modern audiences. Just look at what they did for characters like Mr. Freeze, an ice-themed bank robber in the comics turned into a tragic zombie snowman mourning the loss of his wife in Batman the Animated Series. And how about Brainiac? Originally a green-skinned alien in impossibly short shorts, obsessed with shrinking cities and keeping them in bottles, reworked into the self-centered artificial intelligence of Krypton that took his programming of gathering knowledge way too far in Superman the Animated Series. But there are some characters who transitioned to the shows with virtually no changes at all, and almost all of them were originally created by the late Jack Kirby, especially his fourth world characters like Darkseid Orion and the subject of today's video, Granny Goodness. At first glance, Granny Goodness may seem completely out of place among Darkseid's monstrous minions. Each member of Darkseid's cabal had their specific foes. Darkseid targeted the Forever People, Kalibak fought with his half-brother Orion, and Granny Goodness was the nemesis of Mr. Miracle. For those that aren't aware, Granny Goodness played a pivotal role in the upbringing of the new god Mr. Miracle and his wife Big Barda. I touched upon this in my video about Darkseid, which I have linked to in the video description and the info button in the top right corner if you're interested. But one of the key events in Kirby's Fourth World comics involved a peace treaty between New Genesis, an idyllic planet of sunshine and rainbows, and Apokolips, the urban hellscape that Darkseid called home. The two forces were evenly matched, trapped in an endless war, and as part of their peace treaty, Highfather, leader of New Genesis, traded his newborn son to Darkseid, and he took custody of Darkseid's feral son Orion. While Orion was raised in the sunlit uplands of New Genesis and was trained to overcome his bestial urges, the baby was sent to Granny Goodness to be indoctrinated within her inescapable torture dungeons, the X-Pit. As a cruel joke, Granny and Darkseid decided to name the boy Scot-Free, as in getting away scot-free. Scott spent much of his early life resisting Granny and endured her torture, developing his skills as an escape artist until he worked his way free. While Granny might look like a kindly old woman on the surface, in reality, she is a brutal, manipulative sadist that takes great delight in breaking the spirits of her guests. Granny Goodness is a master at wiping away individuality. Rather than being a physical threat, she uses psychological torture to break the spirits of her prisoners. Through relentless indoctrination and cruelty, she creates Darkseid's loyal army, instilling in them a fanatical obedience. Her methods aren't about brute force or persuasive argument. They're about crushing the will and identity of anyone unfortunate enough to fall under her control. She has their heads shaved and forces them to wear the same clothes, treating them as drones. The best of her female guests are promoted to her elite squad, the Female Furies, who counted Big Barda among their members at one time, before she fell in love with Mr. Miracle and broke free from Granny's influence. The fact that she failed to indoctrinate Scott and that he turned her greatest warrior against her was an indignity that Granny found hard to live down. And so she spent much of her time in the comics trying to capture Scott and bring Barda back to her side. Kirby never provided an origin for Granny Goodness, she simply was, and that was it. This was fairly common with his New Gods characters. They were supposed to be large-scale, epic characters that had existed for eons. We weren't meant to know every single detail of their backstories. Other, more recent writers have written a backstory for her, but it really doesn't have any impact on the animated version of the character. As such, I don't think those stories are relevant to this video. But hey, if you're a fan of those other New God stories, more power to you. When it comes to her appearance in the DCAU, Granny Goodness remains incredibly faithful to her comic book roots, much like most of Kirby's creations in these shows. Jack Kirby's influence on Bruce Timm is well documented. You can see a similar dynamism in the way that they pose their figures, and I know for a fact that director Dan Reber worked with Kirby at Ruby Spears on shows like Turbo Team. Here is a fun picture taken by artist Jim Woodring of a young Dan Reber with the late Kurt Connor on the left and Jack Kirby on the right, messing around with some musical instruments. The fact that the New Gods were so faithfully adapted in these shows indicates how revered Kirby was to the team. Off the top of my head, I can't think of many other significant characters that were so like their comic book counterparts. Lobo, maybe? Granny Goodness's appearance was inspired by a character that horror legend Boris Karloff played in The Girl from U.N.C.L.E., a female assassin called Mother Muffin. So it's entirely appropriate that when the DCAU team cast the character, that they selected the late Ed Asner to voice her. Asner, who was very active politically, noted the similarity between Granny and Barbara Bush, which I cannot unsee now and probably never will. While we see Granny Goodness during the episode Apokolips Now, Part 1, She made her full debut in the Superman the Animated Series episode Little Girl Lost Part 1, where she takes over Intergang after their boss Bruno Mannheim was killed by Darkseid. It's important to note that this story takes place after Darkseid's first attempt at invading Earth. Darkseid had provided Intergang, essentially Metropolis's mafia, with apocalyptian tech to help them defeat Superman, and Mannheim's repeated failure displeased him. As such, Darkseid decided to invade Earth and tried to transform the planet into a new version of Apokolips, as part of his attempt at solving the anti-life equation. Achieving this would remove all free will from the universe, bringing every living being under his control. However, the forces of New Genesis intervened, telling Darkseid that his invasion of Earth was a violation of their peace treaty, and if he didn't leave at once, then their war would resume. Darkseid left, with his tail between his legs, although not before murdering Detective Dan Turpin, who was modelled after Jack Kirby in the show, as a final act of spite. Now, Darkseid did not take the humiliating retreat particularly well, and so he set his most trusted servant, Granny Goodness, to righting this wrong. Not content to simply influence the gang, Granny transformed Intergang from a version of the Mafia into Darkseid's version of the Lost Boys from Peter Pan, arming them with more advanced weaponry. She used the new Intergang to steal parts for a device that would send a comet hurtling into Earth, destroying the planet and passing it off as a natural disaster. A final malicious act on Darkseid's part. His logic being that if he can't have Earth, then no one can. The two-parter also serves as the introduction of Supergirl, another overlooked orphan who could have fallen under Granny's influence had her moral centre not been so firm. Similarly, Darkseid's plan for Earth parallels what had happened to her own home planet, Argo, after Krypton exploded, which fueled Kara's desire to stop them. Ironically, when Darkseid failed, he ordered the female Furies to torture Granny as punishment. Still, Darkseid clearly valued Granny's skills, as we'd see in her next appearance during the two-parter Legacy. In this story, Darkseid kidnaps Superman and has Granny brainwash him into believing that he's a loyal servant of Darkseid by convincing him that his rocket had crash-landed on Apokolips. To further placate a disoriented Superman, she employs one of her most trusted warriors, Lashina of the Female Furies, to seduce him. Of course, in Superman's confused state, consent is a foreign concept. And when he eventually broke free of her control, Lashina's taunts only served to inflame his anger even more. And I don't think that point gets talked about enough, probably because it's pretty disturbing. At one point, there were discussions about having the bastard son of Superman and Lashina turn up, but that was dropped, likely because it was deeply unpleasant. Superman's response to Granny's abuse is still fairly measured. He knocks her into her own brainwashing machine so that she can experience the torture she had inflicted upon him herself. But that didn't seem to take her out of action for too long. Following Darkseid's death in the Justice League two-parter, Twilight, a power vacuum forms on Apokolips. Sensing an opportunity, Granny Goodness sets herself up as a warlord vying for control of Apokolips. She considers herself to be the only sane candidate for the throne, a natural successor given her long-standing loyalty to Darkseid and her ability to brainwash subjects. However, the power vacuum attracts other ambitious villains as well. When Darkseid's son Kalibak is taken hostage by her rival, Vermin Wunderbar, in the Justice League Unlimited episode Ties That Bind, Granny isn't above calling in favours from Mr. Miracle to orchestrate the breakout. In her ruthless quest for control, she kidnaps Oberon, a man who was like a father to Scott, to force him and Barda into doing her bidding. When the Freeze approach the Justice League for help, Martian Manhunter is reluctant to assign resources, wary that any restoration of order on Apokolips might prompt the villains to set their sights on Earth. This doesn't sit well with the Flash, who lends a hand anyway. However, instead of handing Kalibak over, Flash ensures that he is imprisoned on Earth, effectively preventing any single warlord from seizing total control. The chaos among the warlords continues until an unexpected twist occurs in the JLU episode Alive. Lex Luthor inadvertently revives Darkseid. In an almost poetic turn of events, Darkseid shows his gratitude by eliminating most of the assembled villains. Once again reunited with his forces on Apokolips, Darkseid's mere presence forces the warlords to immediately cease their infighting and bow to his authority. With the planet's might consolidated, Darkseid turns his relentless gaze towards Earth, just as the Martian Manhunter had feared. But that was the last we saw of Granny Goodness. Darkseid took his fight to Earth and lost, in the final episode of Justice League Unlimited, and that brought an end to the DC animated universe. For the most part. One of the things I find most compelling about Granny Goodness is the way she balances being both caring and malicious. She nurtures the forces of Darkseid using what appears to be maternal affection to strip away individuality and forge loyal, broken soldiers. I don't think that Granny Goodness is one of the most important characters in the DCAU, but she reminds us that the struggle against tyranny is as much about safeguarding individual spirit as it is about combating external forces. And I think that this is a lesson that we should take into our everyday lives. Okay, that's it for this week's essay. If you liked the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell all your friends about me. You know how YouTube works. If you really enjoyed the video and have the means, please consider making use of the thanks button to send a buck or two my way, because every little helps. I offer channel memberships for $1.99 a month. This will get you early access to my weekly video essay, priority responses to your comments, members-only videos, custom emojis, and an icon on your profile indicating that you're one of my people. And special thanks to my current channel members, who are all listed on the screen right now. Next time, I'll be back on Monday to mark the 15th anniversary of the direct-to-DVD film Justice League: Crisis on Two Earths, and the Dark Mirror version of the Justice League, The Crime Syndicate. And next Friday, I'm finally getting around to talking about my favourite episode of Superman the Animated Series, the sublime noir thriller, The Late Mr. Kent. Hope to see you then.